You're listening to the Guitar Heroes podcast.
And we are back, everybody. Hello. Oh, Lord, Lee Williams. How's it hanging there? You see, have you, isn't it?
What was that you said to me earlier on the phone, Phil?
I can't remember. I've been in the pub all day.
No,
what was that?
You can't repeat that. You can't repeat it.
Oh.
Yes, I am back. I am back from my travels, and I missed you. I missed you guys, and it felt weird to go a week. I mean, can you believe it's been 2 weeks since we recorded the last episode? It's just crazy.
Wow, yeah.
2 weeks, yeah. Time flies, doesn't it?
Time flies when you've got nothing to do, apparently.
I wouldn't know. I'm getting busy now. It's good.
Yeah.
Is everybody getting busier? Because I don't know about you. I'm getting really quite busy now.
Yeah, things are definitely picking up a little bit for me. I literally just had a gig come in today.
So did I.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. I had one coming today. Was it at the same time as you had one, Chris?
No, it's a little later actually for me. Where's your gig from, Phil?
Oh, right. Well, I'm depping in somebody's band. Yeah.
Hang about. We need to discuss dates here because Phil, I need to have a chat with you when we finish this podcast because I had a gig coming today as well, might need some help with it. So yeah, things are definitely on the up, aren't they?
I was going to say, is it in Chris's band and Chris has decided not to do it all and both us two are depping? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I got a call from Chris saying he couldn't make it.
Yeah, so did I. Yeah. I said, oh right. Well, what's it on? Guitar, bass, drums? Well, which do you want to do?
Yeah.
You need to borrow Al's ukulele for this one.
Is it?
Well,
no.
It's a good sign, I guess. It's a good sign. You're right. Things are definitely feeling. Things are feeling more normal. Having said that, they weren't in Wales. They're still a few weeks behind. Well, I don't know. Because I've never been there in sort of normal times. So we were in the heart of the Brecon Beacons, which is quite obviously a remote place anyway, and we kind of went there for that reason. But it was definitely still a lot of things closed, and just popping out for a pint at the pub was much more difficult than it would be here. So, but I don't know whether that's kind of normal there.
Well, you say that. I've got a good friend who lives in the Brecon Beacons, and closed is usually about how it is up there.
Right. I did wonder.
Yeah. I mean, he lives really out in the middle of nowhere. I remember the first time I ever went to his house. Honestly, I thought, is this a joke or something?
Yeah.
Because it felt like I was driving on this dirt track for like 2 days.
Yeah.
And then he said, when you get to this farmhouse, then take a left, and then you've got about the same again. And I'm like, oh my God. But and then all of a sudden his like farmhouse appeared, and it's like, wow,
but that's what it's amazing part of this land. It's just fantastic. But it was blooming cold as well. We were sat there, it's May, and compared to last year when we were probably all in the garden drinking G&Ts and catching some rays, and it was like freezing cold. It's what's going on.
I was following your Instagram, Lee, and some of those photos you took were amazing. So anyone, obviously we'll do socials at the end, but anyone listening, jump onto Lee's Instagram. Some of those photos you took, man, are absolutely incredible.
Did you leave the one on there with the sheep?
I sent that to you privately, Phil.
Oh, sorry.
one for our private collection. But to be fair, the cliches are all true. It's like what did we see a lot of? We saw a lot of valleys and a lot of sheep. But it was amazing. It was amazing. We climbed a few mountains and saw some waterfalls, and it was nice to have our I guess a staycation is what it's known as now, and I guess that's the norm for the foreseeable. So yeah.
Actually, not for me. I've done that for years. I've not been abroad. I can't remember. Probably 2008 or something was probably the last time I went abroad, and I do it all the time. I'm a big lover of the New Forest.
Yeah,
and me and Jay are always going there. Or we were until we weren't allowed, but. I love staycations. I think that it never used to be a thing. You just had a breakaway, and now it's you're going on a staycation. Yeah.
I think it is nice. I think I've done a few, and every time I think I should do more of this, because you go to these places and you're sort of there and you think, am I still in the UK? You can sort of get to these forests, mountains, wherever you may go, and you think, wow, this is really amazing. And actually, just a few days away, we kept saying just 3 or 4 days. When you're there, it feels like you've been away for ages, because you're seeing so much new stuff. Just a few days can really kind of refresh you, can't it? And give yourself a much needed break at the moment, a change.
And then you turn round and you see all the litter and you go, oh yes, we are in the UK, aren't we? There we go.
Well, thankfully there wasn't too much in the mountains.
No. Good. If there's anything that cracks my conker, it's litter. Hate litter.
We got another one, lovely.
Oh, look! Can I, before we move on and get on to more serious things as well, I just need to show you guys this. I appreciate that it's not really going to work on the podcast, but maybe your reactions will work. So, 2 seconds, because we went away because it was my other half Sophie's birthday. It was a birthday treat, really, and part of her birthday.
Happy birthday, Sophie!
She received this.
Oh God! Oh, Lee, put your trousers back on.
Now that is both hilarious and terrifying. The amount of times this thing, I've just caught it in the mirror. It's been in the corner of the room, and I walk in and just
That okay?
You're
going to have to explain, but you are going to have to put that on your Instagram now. So everybody listening to this, you got to go check Lee's Instagram out, because
as well.
This is hilarious. Oh my word!
The weird thing about it is, so what I'm holding here, this is like a printed cushion in the shape of a man with a guitar, but unfortunately it's got my face superimposed on it. This was a gift from my mother, of all people, and it's hideous. To be honest, it's terrifying. And the weirdest thing about it is, if you look now, guys, as I move the head, my expression. Look at that. Yeah. And if I go the other way, you can sort of see. So as I catch it, lying in various places around.
Lee, put its trousers back on.
Is it double faced?
Well, I'm shooting off now, guys. I'm going to leave this guy just in the seat. He's going to do the podcast. Probably be better conversation than I would.
It's double faced, isn't it?
It is
double sided.
I was going to say, Lee, you're two faced.
I got eyes in the back of my head.
Yeah.
It's good to see that they've got the guitar the right way round on both sides, though. I am a right-handed guitar player.
Oh, look, it's a Squire.
Yeah, put it. It's got to go on Instagram, Lee. You've got it, because we've told our avid listeners, our faithful followers, they are going to be dying to see that.
I'll find out which deep dark corner of the internet Mum found this, and maybe on the merch stand in the new year, Phil.
Maybe it could sell merch.
Yeah. This is a new crew member, but maybe we could have buy your band member Story Guitar Heroes merchandise.
It's mini me.
Anyway, there you go.
Oh,
right, what are we talking about today?
Oh, I think I'm done now.
Yeah,
see ya.
I think it was a great episode. See you next week.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, well, it's. I think today it was Chris that came up with this subject, and I think this is quite an interesting little old subject. I can't remember what it was, Chris.
It's so interesting. I forgot it.
Quality broadcasting as ever. The Guitar Heroes.
I can only apologise.
Was it something to do with guitars? I can't remember.
I know hedgehogs win it. I think
it was specifically
just quickly,
booze,
really quickly,
hedgehogs,
really quickly. Right, it was Jay's birthday last week as well.
Birthdays all round,
and birthdays all round, yeah. And I bought her one of those camera traps. Like the wildlife cameras, and you put it wherever you want, and then it senses movement and it picks things up. We've got all sorts going off in our garden. Honestly, it's ridiculous. It's like Grand Central Station out there on a night. It's brilliant. We've had pairs of hedgehogs coming out, which is just phenomenal. Oh dear, I've had far too much pot and beer. Which is brilliant. With all types of cats going in and out. And ladies and gentlemen, we've had a murder.
Oh,
there's been a murder.
God,
yeah, unfortunately, not our cat, but a neighbour's cat. It decapitated a dove. in our back garden.
A dove. Of all things, a dove.
I know, it left the bird but took its head. It's like
that's brutal. The most pure and innocent of all animals slaughtered on your back door.
Yeah, I know. It's so that was quite sad. But yeah, so I don't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing seeing all this on our camera. But yeah, anyway, you mentioned dead dogs, so.
I think we need to come up with a new jingle. I think this is becoming a new section. It's like Walker Watch.
Is.
What's been happening in Phil's back garden?
Walker Watch. There we go. I like it.
Walker Watch.
Yeah, we need something, don't we? There needs to be this is becoming the hottest section of the show at the moment.
Walker Watch. Walker Watch.
Sounds quite dramatic.
It does.
But it is. If you had a murder in the back garden, it's bloody dramatic. I tell you what, I was stressed out all weekend.
And the cat's approaching.
And here comes the mice.
Wow.
Oh no, the cat.
Well, we're 10 minutes in, going strong.
Oh my goodness.
Right, Chris, what we're talking about.
I think the message that we got from Chris earlier was that we were going to talk about hedgehogs, booze, and guitar amplifiers. So we've covered hedgehogs and wildlife.
You can't talk about that.
Is
it past the watershed?
I've got a lovely Guinness. Chris, what are you drinking?
Some wine, my friend. In a non-wine glass.
Port.
Phil? Port. That's standard. Okay. Right. So that's the first two off the list. So guitar amplifiers.
There's lots of slating, isn't there, between people who model, use modelling and all things like that, and real amps. Catwalk model. Yeah, I shake my little tush on the catwalk. Yeah. Some people have to model.
You're not going to get me up there now. God, it would be an absolute nightmare. Can you imagine me walking?
Yeah, Chris has trouble walking in rehearsals, don't you, Chris?
People will see this on the very first show.
I really hope they don't see this on the very first show, Chris.
No. Hopefully we got it sorted by then.
The modelling and guitar amps, and obviously we can't help but model. We do it on the show. There's so many guitar changes. We would need so many amps. It'd be ridiculous. But I think both of you guys have been in my studio. I've just got this new amp, and if I'm ever playing, I just plug into the Line 6, the Helix, stick it through the studio speakers, and usually just play like that if I'm gonna do. But I got a new amp, which you guys know a while back.
Yep.
And the difference, although you're still plugging into speakers, but having a valve amp next to you, rattling your socks, it's just so different, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It is different. I'm not saying it's better or worse or anything like that, but it's just so different. Over to you.
Well, I was going to say, why don't we start with a little bit of context? You know how I like to do this. I like to take it right back to the start, and then we can build some foundation on where to base this conversation. So,
sounds like we're cueing some music. I don't know.
Well, I have got my notebook here ready to go. So if you want to cue the music, then we can do it.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please sit back, wipe your eyes for the music.
What will we learn today in Lessons with Lee?
Tyler, pay attention. Okay, so I'm going to take you back to really the end of the 1920s, 1930s. This is when we see amplification and guitar amplifiers, as we know today, becoming a thing. In the 1920s, amplification in general had really been found only in cinemas, and there was some PA systems starting to appear. But interestingly, at the time, they could only get the technology to work safely by using batteries. So the PA systems that were around were very, very big, and they had these massive batteries that were required to power them. And it wasn't until they developed, I think it was things like the capacitors and the rectifier tubes, that finally allowed them to start using mains power safely and still get a good sound, that amplifiers started to become smaller. But they weren't yet guitar amplifiers. They were still kind of vocal amplifiers used in cinema, theatre, that kind of thing. 1932, we have the Electro String Company, which I believe was tied somehow to Rickenbacker at the time. They released the first amp that was specifically aimed at working with string instrument pickups. And I believe they were sold as kind of like a pickup and amp set. This became a thing. So there were no solid body guitars at this time, as you'll know, but acoustic players, lap steel players, they needed a way to compete with the big band sound and just get their instruments lifted up. So they had kind of been making do by using these PA amps. But when I say PA amps, they really had no kind of tone circuitry, no EQ, nothing like we know today. Just literally something to make it louder. So anyway, 1932, Electro String Company, they come out with this amp that is aimed at stringed instruments. Lap steels, acoustic guitars. You buy the set, slide the pickup under your strings, and off you go. And actually, the first recording of an electrically amplified string instrument was in September of 1933, and it was a chap called Milton Brown, and he was featuring the steel guitar player Bob Dunn. So 1930s, we start seeing this, and it wasn't really until, obviously, Leo came on the scene, late 1940s, 1950, that guitar amplifiers really became a thing. Other people were experimenting with them. Gibson were dabbling with them, but I think it was Leo's success with everything electric guitar, as you would have heard in previous episode when we discussed the Telecaster. That's really when this idea of making the guitar a modern, electrified, loud instrument. And of course, he started to develop his amplifiers. He had his background in radio technology. People had been dabbling in that. And then we started to see the introduction of more typical features that we would recognize today. So tone circuits, treble, bass, reverb, and he moved on to things like tremolo and, that kind of thing. So that's kind of like the very, very beginnings of where we begin with guitar amplifiers.
Oh, wow.
There's more to come, but you might have some stuff to add at that stage.
That's really interesting. I'm still taking all that in this.
Yeah, I got really comfortable then. I was like watching.
All right, well, I'll carry on.
This is great.
So obviously, Fender in the 50s, they had their tweed amplifiers. These were still very simplistic amplifiers. They had volume, tone, no distortion as such. No way of distorting these amps other than just turning them up. That was something that really, I think, happened by accident. It was kind of, as we moved through the 50s and certainly into the early 60s, guitar players were pushing their amplifiers harder. Bands were getting louder, performances were getting bigger, and they started to discover the kind of pleasing effect of this distortion and started to kind of use that to a creative end. And then we started to see other people getting more involved. And of course, big Jim Marshall coming in I think it was 1962. Was it the JTM 45? 1963? Which was essentially a recreation of which Fender amp?
Oh God, is it the Bassman?
Correct.
It is.
I was going to say that, but I thought, no, never.
Yeah. Wow. So over in the States, obviously, you have to remember back in the 50s, much like with the guitars and things we've discussed before, for us over here in the UK, where there was an exploding music scene and the whole blues thing was coming back, and there was this separation of equipment that we've seen. There's stories of oh, sorry, I've just knocked something over in the studio.
Is it your wallet?
No, that would never have made that much noise, Phil.
It's floating over there with my plectrums.
So the Americans were making all the fantastic product, the Fender guitars, the Gibson guitars, and then the Fender amps. But it wasn't the world we live in today. You couldn't just phone up any old guitar store and just go, hey, I want to buy one of those Fender amps. I want to buy a Strat. It was much harder to come by. And some of the innovation that now we're very grateful for, i.e. Marshall amps, they kind of came about because of a demand in the UK that you just couldn't fulfill. So Jim Marshall and his guys at the shop were getting asked for things like, hey, can you get me one of those Fender type amps? And instead of going through the rigmarole of trying to order one in, they said, well, we could probably make the same thing over here. And I think it was some of those differences in the actual manufacturing parts that yielded a slightly different sound. And therefore, the kind of Marshall sound was born out of British manufacturing. Yeah. But really, the design for it, the inspiration and the original circuitry was pretty much just straight up Fender Bassman.
Wow.
Yeah, there you
Blimey.
go. And obviously from there, it got in the hands of Eric Clapton, the Blues Breaker. You know, the Beano album happened, and Distortion, as we know it, was here. Chuck Berry, obviously, another early kind of pioneer of pushing those tweed amps, those early Fenders, early Gibsons into Distortion. And, as they say, the rest is history, I guess.
I find as we get later on now, you kind of notice a lot more handmade amps on the market. Like it's almost trying to get back to how amps were made back in the 60s and early 70s. I mean, the 60s was probably the most popular era for Fender amps. I think they really come into their own, I think, like with the Princeton, which is an amp I actually have now. You see amps nowadays trying to go back to, you know, the hand-wired thing.
Well, that's a bit like we've discussed with guitars. It's a bit the same as like custom shop guitars.
It is.
We said in the Telecaster episode that one of the most popular guitars today is still the Telecaster, and of course the Strat. So I think I don't know whether it always comes back to me is, was the gear that great, or is it just that period of music, those iconic years where so many great records were made, that we kind of want a piece of that action. We want a Marshall JTM 45 because such and such played it, you know?
Yeah, well, I could have a rant brewing here, Lee. I could have a rant.
Go on, please. We want a rant.
I think I've got a rant here. Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Go on. Well, I'm going to sit back. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time again. Let's cue the music.
Phil's rant. Right, if there's one thing that blows my tubes, it's this, right?
Oh,
hand-wired.
So good.
It's like we'd rehearsed this, but we really haven't. It just came to me. But hand-wired boutique amps. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but they might be great in a studio or in a bedroom or anything like that, but I've had a little bit of experience with these hand-wired boutique amps that they don't work. I'm sorry, they don't work. I know someone who's got a hand-wired AC30. Okay, he went on a tour. He's also got a Chinese AC30, and he took 2 amps with him on tour. The Chinese one as a backup, obviously.
So
guess which one started and finished the tour?
I was going to say the Chinese
one.
Again, Chris, just for a bit of context, the Chinese one's a PCB board.
Yeah. It's about as manufactured as you can get. Yeah. So both started the tour. Guess which one finished the tour? The Chinese, £600 or whatever, £800 or however much it was. The hand-wired one, I think, was repaired 2 or 3 times throughout the tour, and in the end, he just went, "Just leave it in the truck. I'm selling it after I get home." And I'm thinking, and I know a few stories like that. The great are these, but they're quite temperamental. It's like, it's like, I don't know, it's like going on a road trip or if you're a lorry driver and taking your fine china teapot with you, isn't it? It's gonna get broken. It just seems so fragile and well, I don't know.
That was kind of, if we move, so we've discussed the 50s and the 60s, and obviously in the 70s we saw the introduction of solid state transistor amps. Yep. And at first they were marketed. That was an evolution of technology. Let's look at it this way. I mean, these days, what technology anywhere in the world, other than I think a few military applications, still uses vacuum tube technology? It is an ancient thing these days in the world of iPods and iPhones and stuff. So in the 70s, when they introduced transistors, it was seen as that. It was exactly what you're saying, Phil. This is like an upgrade. The days of doing everything by hand and using lots of glass and valve technology, that's all old hat. But I think something happened in there as well, that we adopted that for a while, and then a lot of people went, it kind of just doesn't sound as good. But I hear what you're saying, and I think you're definitely right that it's almost same with guitars. Almost, it's like the more expensive and the more hand time that's been invested in building that, almost the more delicate they are, isn't it? It's I've got a real high end acoustic. They sound amazing, but they are fragile. You take the cheapest nasty acoustic, it's going to sound like arse. but it's it's just the neck
Gonna
won't
work,
move, nothing will happen to it.
For sure.
It's-
Yeah, for sure. I mean, without a doubt, those out of those AC30s, the hand-wired ones sounded fantastic. It's awesome. I mean, what a sound! Bloody amazing. But it couldn't finish the tour.
Right.
And you've got to think to yourself, well, if you're a gigging musician, I get, I'm trying to be kind, doctors and lawyers, right, who can actually go out there and, people who drive Audis and things like that, who can go to Absolute Music and go, I think I'll have that custom shop Strat, and I'll have that custom wound, whatever, Bassman, the reissue, whatever's in. And so, which is fine, and it means that the economy is booming in our world because people are spending money on instruments, but they're not going to gig it, and it's probably wouldn't last if they did try gig it. It's your bog state, it's your blues juniors, it's not a hand wired thing, is it? But how many bands do you see? It's a valve amp, don't get me wrong, but it's just it's a workhorse type valve amp, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
You know what I mean? Do you think, on that note, that, because in my mind it sort of seems easier to accept a mass produced amp than it does a mass produced guitar? I don't know whether it's just because the guitar is seen as the more iconic of the two, or whether it's probably because the guitar is obviously your point of contact with the whole rig. It's the more tactile of the two.
I was going to say exactly that.
So I would say that's where the connection, I think, happens. I don't think you can really... I know I can't really hear a big difference between, like say my Princeton is the 68 reissue model, which I bought from Yuli. Thank you very much. Yes. But I can't hear a difference between that and a ham-wired Fender. To be honest, my ears just can't pick up on it. The Princeton I got sounds awesome. The Blues Juniors, I've been for about 5 of them over the years, and like you said, Phil, they are workhorse amps, and they just sound great. They just sound awesome.
I used to have a Blues Junior. It's always flight cased, and the amount of times I saw that thing launched out of trucks and smacking into other flighty cases, I'm thinking, I really don't want to be here on build-up. I can't bear to see all this happening.
Well, my Blues Junior went up on fire at a gig.
Yeah, and they still work. Well, yours probably didn't, but but I never had a problem with my Blues Junior, at all. I mean, I got rid of it, and here we go. I got rid of it, and I got a Mesa Boogie, and guess what? First gig out, it didn't work. Brilliant.
No.
Yeah, perfect.
No.
Yeah, so that didn't last long. I got rid of that. But I really like the sound of it. I just couldn't keep it.
In my mind, it does. Something makes sense when you can sort of imagine an amplifier being easier to mass produce. I guess because there's not that element of, you're not going to be touching it, you're not going to be hugging it, you're not going to be going, how does it feel in under the hand when I play it? To me, that's where the real hand element of guitar building comes in. You want those lovely finished edges, those rolled edges on the fretboard, the fretwork to be fantastic. All of that, in my mind, still seems very much hand labor, whereas circuit boards and electronics in general, I guess. But there's something to be said for making an amp as high quality as it can be. I guess it comes down to like simplicity as well, because the way I see it is that the more on an amplifier, the more channel switching, the more effects, that's all things that could go wrong. So maybe if you've got a very simple hand-wired amp that's, just very lean, maybe there's less to go wrong there. Maybe
this was my problem, Lee, because I bought a Two-Rock a few years back, a Two-Rock Sensor 35, I think it was. Had all hand-wired. It had the EQ section all had pull switches on. The effects loop on the back had pull bright switches for it. It was valve driven as well. It was so complicated, and I just thought, it's just one day, it's just not going to work at a gig. I could never get a good sound out of it either. That's why I traded it for a Princeton, which is
He had the amp for 2 days, and he still hadn't finished pulling switches out and flicking toggle switches and knobs and things.
Yeah,
it was a complicated amp, was that, Chris? I remember that well.
I had that for 2 years, that amp, and not once I could get a good sound out of it. I wanted it to break up like a valve amp would, and it just wouldn't do it. And I plugged into that Princeton just once, had them side by side in the PA room at Absolute, didn't I, Lee? And Les Paul straight in, and I was like, that's the sound, and it sounded awesome compared to the Two Rock was I think new, they fetch over like $2,000 now.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And the Princeton was £900, and I thought that edit for breakfast any day of the week.
I think that's why a lot of those 50s and 60s Fender circuits are still so popular, because much like we said on the Telecaster podcast, the Telecaster is still so popular because it's so simplistic. It doesn't force itself too far down any one genre. So, and therefore it's going to crop up on hundreds and thousands of different festival stages, lots of different genres, lots of different players, because you can kind of take it and manipulate it to your own end.
Yeah.
And that's the same for these amps. I think the more you add to an amp, the more you kind of say, right, this is just for this type of player. Almost in trying to make it often puzzles me that when you see a new brand, a brand launching a new product, and they've said that we've tried to make this as versatile as possible, and they've packed dozens and dozens of features on there, and actually they've done exactly the opposite. Like what is more versatile than one of these simplistic Fenders, simplistic Marshalls? You can do so much with them,
and they're great pedal platform amps as well, which is key nowadays. People are using pedals more than ever to get, like, you could take a Princeton into any session if you wanted to do, probably not metal, but you could go in and do a rock, anything from jazz to country to rock, with any pedal going into it. You get the sound that you need. And also the trem and the reverbs on them are lovely as well. Real nice. They're tube driven as well on those Princetons. So. You're listening to the Guitar Heroes podcast.
All right, so what do you guys think to this question then? Because this is something that seems to come up in interviews with like guitar heroes all the time. And I've heard so many different opinions. What would you class as more important? Spending your money on a great guitar and maybe saving on an amp, or spending your money on a great amp and saving on a guitar? What do you think is going to yield you a better sound?
Guitar. Because if you're not comfortable with what's in your hands, you're not going to be happy, are you?
Exactly. And that's where the tone starts, doesn't it, Phil? Exactly from there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've all done gigs where we've had our amps go down, maybe, or whatever you're going through, and you might have a spare something or other, but you get through the gig and things like that. But if like you've had a main guitar for certainly as many years as I have, and something happens to my guitar ever, not that it has, to be honest, but if it did and I had to use a backup guitar for the rest of the night, I'd be a lot less comfortable doing that than what I would, using a different amp or something. A lot less comfortable.
Well, I'm going to be controversial then, and I'm going to say I agree with you from a playing point of view, and certainly if you're you're just starting out, then the guitar is the most important thing, because, like you said, you're actually going to play it. If it's painful to play, not enjoyable to play, or if it's letting you down from a setup point of view, then it's a non-starter. But I personally think that actually, in terms of like sound, an amp is going to have more of an effect. So look at these two examples. If I was on stage and I played a £200 Squier guitar or bass through an expensive rig, let's just say it's £1,000 to £2,000 amp.
Are you talking to experience here, Lee?
Well, there you go. Yeah, and you actually see this quite often. You do see that. You might see like a rental backline amp that is worth £800, like £1,000, and someone's using a cheap guitar through it, and it sounds pretty good. I would say that is probably going to yield a better sound than, say, you've got a £3,000 custom shop whatever, and you're plugging it in to a Spider 5. 4, Spider 3, or some ridiculously cheap. I would think that the guitar is going to be so kind of tarnished by that amplifier that you're never going to hear the money in the guitar. Whereas the other rig, £200 guitar through a 2-rock or something, it's going to sound great. It's not going to sound as good as the good guitar with the good amp, but it's going to sound pretty good.
I've kind of been on both sides of that, because I did a lot of touring in Europe where we could literally only take a guitar and whatever we could fit in our, hold-all bag and pedals. We didn't really have multi-effects things or anything like that. We just had what pedals we could put in. But always took the old guitar, and sometimes we had PVs to plug into, sometimes we had Fenders, sometimes we had Vox, and that was never such an issue. But I remember we had to fly to Lithuania, and we didn't take the guitars purely because the airline that we were going with was renowned for trashing them. So we hired guitars out there, and oh man, it was so uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable playing. Yeah. I had there's two occasions. One was a Strat similar to mine, similar to my number one. It was some sort of reissue like mine, in the same colour. And then another time it was just crap set up and intonation was out. It was horrible. And then another time was in another Strat where it was an ESP Strat, and that was just absolute toilet. Not that the guitar's rubbish, but it was just set up rubbish. It was horrible. Yeah. And it was like, I don't care what I'm plugging into, the guitar has to be right for me.
Yeah, you're right. I guess there's two answers to that question, because you're absolutely right in terms of putting you in the right headspace and feeling right and feeling natural and comfortable on the guitar. It's always going to be the guitar. That's always the more personal of the two items. Yeah. But when it just comes, say it's just a blind test, and you just, which rig do you like the sound of better? Then I could, certainly just play a £3,000 Les Paul through a 50 quid practice amp, and it's going to sound like ass. Whereas I could play a £100 guitar through a £2,000 amp, and it's going to be like pretty good. You know what I mean?
Having said that, have Andertons not done that?
Probably. There's probably a video out there for you.
But to be honest, you got the new Squier Classic Vibe guitars out. I think they've been out for maybe a couple of years now. But they sound amazing, those Classic Vibes. And Andertons, in fact, did a blind test on this. It might have been Danish Pete in the episode with the captain. And basically, they were handed similar guitars with the same sort of lacquer and same neck profiles and everything. One was like a Classic Vibe. One was a custom shop and stuff. And I think the Classic Vibe had like a satin neck on the back, so it didn't have the sticky lacquer feel or anything. Yeah. And they were like, "Oh yeah, this is definitely like a custom shop. This feels real nice." And they couldn't really tell the difference in the sound. I think maybe at one point you could definitely tell the pickup difference and stuff. Sometimes the Squiers can be kind of, a bit thin sounding and stuff. But,
well, okay, it is. But it's real close. You play a Classic Vibe and a custom shop on the show. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, you see now that Classic Vibe, that's a fantastic guitar, and I know. I mean, I am comfortable with that guitar. It's been set up well, and I've played it. It wouldn't be my first choice of guitar to play all night, but if I did a blind test on 2 rigs and I plugged that Classic Vibe into a lovely 60s Fender amp, that's going to sound incredible. It's going to sound great. And then if I took my custom shop and I plugged it into some awful, package guitar amp that's 50 quid, it's going to take my lovely guitar and it's going to completely ruin it. So I would, the amp rig would be, if I had to choose one for the night, I'd probably end up going with the amp rig. Yeah. But it is I think different. You see different players. I've heard players over the years that say, they're really into amps, and amps are more important. I guess the takeaway from it is that the whole signal chain. You hear Eric Johnson talk about this all the time, and he says he's a tone hunter because he's realised that every single part is important, and it's the interplay between your guitar and your amp. And you could have a fantastic amp in terms of its build quality, its reputation, but it might not marry well with your particular guitar or your particular playing style. Yeah. So I think, certainly when we're talking about these older amps, these more traditional valve designs, that is the case. But I want to come full circle back to where you started, Phil. You were saying about us using digital gear on the show. So maybe we could move, because we had valve technology dominating the 50s, 60s, and certainly most of the 70s. Then we started to get some transistor stuff, some digital stuff started coming in the 80s. But these days, modeling is a big thing. Yeah. So maybe we should...
Do you know, the one thing that I always, and we get this a lot on when we used to be in the guitar show, when we used to do meet and greets, I've countless times people used to come up at the end of the night and say, "Oh, why do you keep the amps off stage? Is it because they're too loud?" Or, do you keep the amps off stage? And I go, no, we don't use amps. We use modelling. So our audience is a kind of like a blind test, aren't they? If they can't see the amps, they don't necessarily know amps aren't there. But not one person has ever come up and go, God, those modelers don't sound. They all think it's amplifiers, and they're shocked when you tell them that it's not.
It's true.
The thing is, they sound incredible. The thing is, if you mic up an amplifier, the sound is perceived very differently to being in the room with one.
Absolutely.
And an example, for tonight's podcast, I recreated my rig, and my favorite gigging rig with an amp is real simple. I love my Princeton with a tube screamer,
right,
and a tuner as well, and my guitar. That I've always been real simple with that. Even when I first started, I had a massive Marshall stack.
Yeah,
a 1959 SLP. It was a Paul Kossoff model. Again, all hand wired, but I had just one drive going into it. I quite like simplicity, and and even with the Helix, I love that it can be so simple on digital gear as well. It's all contained into one device. But listen to this.
Yeah, it sounds like arse, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I got a Princeton model on here with a tube screamer with a bit of spring reverb, which is what you find on the amp.
Yeah.
And it sounds so close to the real thing.
I think the point there, though, Chris, is that what you said about it being a recorded sound. So what people need to expect when they hear modeled sounds is that you're not trying to. That sound is not the sound of a Princeton sat
in a room,
a foot away from you in a room. If you had a Princeton there in the room right now, it would sound very different to your ear. Yes. But if you mic'd that Princeton and played it back on the podcast, the mic'd recorded sound would be very, very.
Generally, this is what people are hearing nowadays. Like you go and see Journey, like Neil Schon has all his amps in a different room off stage. So what everyone's hearing is his mic'd up amp going through front of house speakers. So this is generally what everyone's hearing.
Well, we were going to do something with Yamaha before COVID hit, and it was basically, a bit of a getting people into the headquarters and giving them a bit of a Yamaha experience and a Line 6 experience and that type of thing. And one of the things I was going to do on stage was say, because a lot of people go, oh, if you play your Helix through that PA, it ain't going to sound like that Vox AC30 there. No, you're right, it isn't. And that's exactly what we were saying, isn't it? But if I was to put that Vox AC30 in the room next door and mic it up,
run it through the same desk.
I'm going to go, right, which one's which? You tell me which is which. And again, like what I say to people is when they go to modelling, take all the noise gates off, have it a noisy amp, because an AC30 ain't noisy, isn't quiet. I beg your pardon. Yeah. A cranked up Fender's not quiet. A cranked up Marshall's definitely not quiet. So don't have the noise gates on. Just have them as wide open as you can get them. And I pretty much guarantee people would be sort of head scratching a bit before they made a decision. Definitely.
Yeah.
And they'd probably get it wrong as well.
Yeah, and then it comes back to the practical application element. I think we probably covered this in we did an episode on modelling, didn't we? But for us, for a lot of working musicians, if you want the flexibility of a few amp sounds in one night, or in our case, we need probably dozens of amp sounds in one night. Yeah. You just can't beat it. You cannot beat the fact that you can take one pedal board and it can give you Marshalls, Voxes, Fenders, boutique pedals. All sorts, bass rigs. I mean, look, we all play bass rigs, guitar rigs, acoustic rigs through one thing, and the haulage for the show, if we did it the real way, would be crazy, wouldn't it? It would just be crazy. Yeah. But given the choice of just sitting down and playing through an amp, I think we all agree that it is still a very enjoyable thing to just plug into an amp, like you say, Phil. There's something that you get out of it, but sometimes the practical side needs to take over. And that's where this modelling stuff comes in, doesn't it? It's
you
amazing,
get,
really.
and as you get as guitar players get older, do we want to be lugging big amps around? I speak to a lot of guitar players that, get rid of their AC30s or certainly stop using them and, maybe go down the transistor route. I've known a couple of people that have gone down the Line 6 route and, all because they don't want to be lugging loads of gear around, and it's a great alternative now. I mean, maybe 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been such a great alternative if you didn't want to, carry your heavy AC30 around, apart from the transistor amp that probably did sound a bit pants, but technology's come on so much we sound like we used to.
That's the thing, isn't it? I think technology helps amp manufacturing far more than it does guitars, it seems, because in guitars still we still can't seem to break away from those 50s and 60s designs. They hit the nail on the head and they were the peak of production. But with amplifiers and with electronics production, it seems that certainly the modelling stuff, if you look at where it was 20 years ago to now, and we look at a Fender Bassman or look at a Marshall JTM, the design hasn't changed in like half a century, but look at where we've come in just 10 years of modelling and where it's going to go. I always find it amazing to see almost every week, every month, a new kind of purist player that I've maybe follow on Instagram or something has all of a sudden now got one of these on their pedal board or got a Kemper or something. It's like the tick list, you're scrubbing that name off, right? They've stayed pure and Valve and true to the old stuff for as long as they could, and now, right, he's gone. He's got an HX Stomp. He's got a Kemper. It is, I guess, it's testament to how good it is.
It was a real hard transition for me. I couldn't dive fully into a Helix. That they're £1,200, and not having any experience with digital gear, I thought that was quite a big step for me. So I went and got the HX Stomp. Yeah. 2 weeks with that HX Stomp, going to wedding gigs without an amp. That Stomp just fits perfectly in your guitar case. Sounds awesome. It's consistent. It's reliable. Within 2 weeks of gigging with it, I was like, I'm buying the full Helix. And I think,
that works the other way around as well. People that have got the full Helix then go, oh, I just want a little fly rig and get the Stomp as well, don't they?
That's where I'm at the moment. I'm looking at my board just thinking, oh man, I could just do with just a small little rig. But I think it's just horses for courses, isn't it? We all play both. We all have amplifiers and modelling gear, and it's all just there to help you get the job done. And I don't think any of this sort of like, purist versus modern, or I don't play amps, I don't play digital. It's just nonsense, really. It's like,
I think it's all down to the gig you're doing, isn't it? Certain gigs might actually require you to have an amp. They might want that on stage.
Yeah, it might be part of the show if it's for instance, if it's a sort of throwback show and you've just got a couple of great guitar sounds for the night. It's quite a rootsy type band. Then amazing, an old Fender Marshall or something it's gonna give you the look. People are going to want to see those amps on stage. I still find it weird, and I must admit, I get why we use it, and I get why people use it, but if I go and see a real big band that I know can afford to carry the real thing, I still do like to see those amps on. Something about the glowing red lights of a cooking Valve amp on stage.
Absolutely.
That, it's just
I remember seeing Whitesnake
pre-gig.
Is it? I think at Bournemouth. I think Doug Aldridge. He had like 3 or 4 Marshall stacks on stage. Whether they were all on, I don't know, but it looked awesome, and the sound was so loud, like you could feel your chest every time you hit a chord or any note. You could feel it. Now, I think that's the difference with amps. They move air, even if they're on stage going through, the front of house rig. They're still moving air, aren't they? And people in the audience can definitely feel it, especially in the front row.
I tell you what's funny. Sorry, Lee. I'll tell you what's funny is that we, for a few years, we didn't have any amps on stage at all. And then Line 6 gave us a load of power cabs. And now we've got amps on stage, and I think we could probably afford to have them a bit louder. I think because we've got a fairly quiet stage, well, apart from Al, who's never bloody quiet, is he? But love you, Al. But we have our power cabs on stage.
Sorry?
And yeah. And like, I'm always worried about the volume of it, and I'm thinking, do you know what? We could afford to crank these up a little bit and move a bit more air on stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm I've got so used to the silent stage and running in ears that when we do that now, I'm just thinking, oh yeah, but I don't want to affect front of house. I don't want to there's something nice about when you get used to it. It is weird. It's weird to transition, and not every gig is going to work like that. But our gig does work very well like it. So when you start to incorporate any more stage sound, you think, well, hang on, what am I losing here? What am I going to muddy? But coming back to your point, Chris, these big amps, these big powerful amps, most of these designs, they do come from a time when PA equipment wasn't great. So they were designing these stacks with sort of PA duties in mind as well. You needed to be the guitar player, have great guitar sound, but also kick that out to the audience. As soon as these amazing PA systems got up to where they are now, and also venues got to the sizes they are, you never really, if you go to a big gig, you're not really hearing backline, are you? So you don't necessarily need 125 decibels from your amp just for the stage, do you?
Actually, I went to see Winery Dogs a few years ago in Bristol, and we were at the back, sort of to the far right, and I was thinking, you can't really hear Richie Kotzon's guitar that well. It's, what's the engineer doing? So we went and walked over near where the desk was, and which was basically in front of Richie Kotzon's cabs, and oh my God, you could hear that.
Oh, really?
He had two Cornford 4x12 Cornford stacks on stage, and they were probably about as loud as they could go. So there were virtually nothing in the PA. And this is in the O2 in Bristol. Is it the Academy, O2 Academy in Bristol?
Yeah.
And so you go to where the PA stacks are. You can hardly hear Richie Kotzon. You go into the middle, and all you can hear is Richie Kotzon. I'm like, right, yeah. So nobody's gonna. Who dare tell Richie to turn down? Then no one, by the looks of it.
No. I think it's always going to be that clash of like getting the job done in terms of the best sound, but also we just can't deny that something old school and rock and roll. I guess it all comes back to Hendrix, doesn't it? And just having that cranked amp and that feedback and kind of harnessing the power on stage. I looked up actually online. I thought this was quite an interesting comparison. I just looked at like best guitar amps. I did some Googling as I usually do. And I think this kind of sums up where we are really in terms of amp development. So this is all from the Guitar World website, but they listed the 5 most iconic amps of all time as number 1. Can you guess what number 1 is?
I'm gonna say
JCM 800.
Oh, damn you, Chris! I was going to say that. Is it?
No, they listed the AC30. The Vox AC30, number 1. Number 2 was the Fender 5E3 Tweed Deluxe.
I'm crap at this game.
Number 3 was the Mesa Boogie Dual Rectifier.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Number 4, it's a great amp. I've had one. It was one of the best things I ever owned. It was amazing, and I do regret selling it. Number 4, JCM 800. And number 5 was the 1959 SLP Marshall,
which I used to own. I sold that for 400 quid.
Interestingly enough, not from 1959, from 1965.
No. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? But that was a loud amp. That was so 100 watts. Jesus.
Right. So fast forward now. Best guitar amps 2021 from the same website. Number 1.
All right, let me guess. I'm
gonna have a guess. The PT100, Pete Thorne.
I'm best. Boss Katana.
Good guess. It's on the list. The Katana was in at number 3. Number 1 was the Orange Micro Terror.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Which is this tiny,
tiny
like 1 watt little hybrid valve amp thing.
Yeah.
Number 2 was, I don't know if you've seen this, the Positive Grid Spark amp.
Yes. My friend has just bought one. I had to go the other day on one.
Yeah. Is it good?
Yeah.
This is like a Bluetooth amp, isn't it? With like an app.
It's really impressive. You have an app on your phone. You can basically dial in your rig, the order at which the pedals sit and everything. You can choose the amps. And I pulled up a Soldano. started playing some Clapton on it, like getting that 80s Clapton sound a bit.
And it sounded nothing like a Soldano.
It sounded amazing.
Oh, really?
Honestly, it sounded really good. It doesn't do any. You can use it as a USB device as an interface to record with, but it doesn't have any kind of externals, any outs going to like a PA rig if you wanted to use it live. I think they have a more expensive version of it, which I think is around £1,000 to £1,200.
Wow.
But it's for 200. It's £200, I think, and it's so impressive for what you get. It's so much bang for buck.
Okay, so number 3 was the Katana, which, to be fair, pretty impressive little solid state amp.
Yep.
Number 4, the Humble Blues Junior.
Yeah,
I think we've all owned one.
Yep.
Great, affordable Fender valve amp. Number 5, the Vox AC15. So it's just interesting that those, whether you agree with Guitar World's suggestions or not, interesting to see the change. Clearly, we've moved from iconic, powerful, big valve amps to much, much smaller, even bedroom amps, digital amps. You know, it kind of. I think it shows where we've come on the guitar amp journey.
Well, there we go. That's a really good way of wrapping up the podcast. We've gone from big, powerful amps to tiny little pathetic mothers that nobody wants anymore. Great, brilliant. That's great. Oh,
yeah,
dear.
There we go. Send us a message. Let us know what you're using. What is your amp or amp type piece of gear of choice?
I'll tell you what's funny,
as well.
actually.
What do you prefer?
That
question you had earlier, Lee, I think would be a good one to send out to everyone. Guitar or amp? What comes first? What's more important? It'd be interesting.
Okay.
I was going to say that. So what's quite funny is that we've kind of all chosen our own amps, and I don't think really. Oh no, I have, but we haven't really bought an amp recently. But I have. I've just completely messed up what I was just about to say. But it's because I've had one of these before, and I'm like, But Chris,
you bought that amp to sell it. You saw that and thought, that's a bit of a deal. I'll have that and I'll flog it. And then it worked its charm on you, and now you can't get rid of it, which I don't think a piece of digital gear would do, would it?
I'm just looking at it now, and it's just such a gorgeous amp. I want to go stick my finger in its jack socket. It's beautiful. It really is.
And it smells good when you fire it up.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, so I've got a Music Man amp, an RD 1112 RD, which is a hybrid valve amp. The valves in the power section, which is very, very Fender-like. Chris has got his Fender Princeton. Lee's got his Fender Blues Junior. It kind of tells you what sort of... We like the Fender amps, obviously, don't we?
But it's like what I said earlier. They're great pedal platform amps. You could put any pedal into them, and generally they work really well. That pedal show on YouTube do really good examples of how pedals react with certain different amps.
Yeah.
Like a drive, like the Tube Screamer might not sit as nice in a Vox as it does in a Fender.
Sure.
But
look, again, I think we've sung Leo's praises enough. Well, if that's even possible, I don't think you can sing his praises enough, really.
So to summarise at this point,
fair
Lee,
play, kudos to that man, because look,
Matt, exactly. Yeah.
Even though there were these guitar amps knocking around in the 30s and 40s, like I said at the start of this episode, it wasn't really until Leo started pushing them out that they became such a popular thing. And then if you think of all the offshoots, everything really comes back to those early Fender designs, because we've already said Marshall JTMs, things like Mesa Boogies. Randall Smith, he was developing Fender-type circuits. Even Howard Dumble, the famous Dumble, based around a Fender-type circuit.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the Vox AC30, that was the one that broke the mold, and that was something a little bit different. But, you know.
The point is...
What a guy. Leo
if you want to take guitar playing seriously, go double denim. Fender guitar, Fender amp.
And so you go. On that note, Lee, do the socials. We're out of here.
Okay, so to find us on Facebook, you can search Phil Walker Guitarist, Lee Williams Guitarist, and Chris Anthony Guitar. On Instagram, it's Phil Walker Guitar, Lee Troy Guitar, and Chris Anthony Guitar. You can search Story Guitar Heroes on Instagram and Facebook. And, of course, there's a website, www.storyofguitarheroes.com. And head over to YouTube, where you can see some videos of Phil playing some guitar amps and some modelling type gear. It's Phil Walker Guitarist on YouTube. And we are very, very much looking forward to getting every day slightly closer to seeing you back on the road soon.
16th of July. 16th of July, everybody. The Story of Guitar Heroes is at the Haymarket Theatre in Basingstoke. There we go.
By the time this podcast goes out... by the time this podcast goes out, we will be within 2 months of our first gig back.
Yeah. So see you there. Get your tickets, guys. Haymarket Theatre, Basingstoke, 16th of July. Over and out.
See ya.
I've forgotten how to play guitar, though.